Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have the final batch of Warhammer 40k spoilers for you. They're mostly Imperium cards, so without further ado, let's get started. And kicking things off today is Commissar Severina Rain for 1 colorless, 1 white, 1 black, a legendary creature, human soldier, 2/2, with leading from the front. Whenever it attacks, each opponent loses X life, where X is the number of other attacking creatures, and Summary Execution, which is 2 colorless, sacrifice another creature, you gain 2 life, and draw a card. So I see a lot of things to like here. This is really good in a token strategy because you attack with 3 or 4 things and suddenly they're losing 3 or 4 life. And that's pretty nuts by itself. Each opponent is taking this damage, not just one of them, so that's awesome. Added on to that, you have a nice sacrifice effect that lets you trade your creature tokens in for cards, and you've got a pretty spicy commander. Most Orzhov decks are already a little bit aristocrat-y, is that a word? And this in particular fits right into aristocrat kind of synergies because they want to have lots of small dispensable creatures, so any kind of token making strategy is going to be great here, and being able to ping the opponents when you attack, as well as the usual kind of death pingers, Zulaport, Cutthroat, and the like, is really solid. Plus you can draw a bunch of cards if you really need to late in the game. It's not like these decks have any trouble making mana. And next up we have And They Shall Know No Fear. 1 colorless and 1 white. It's an instant. Choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until end of turn. This is nice. It's a slight upgrade in tribal decks for the typical kind of make everything indestructible effect. There's a bunch of those, but this one costs 1 mana less and also gives a boost to power for your creatures, so I think this is worth mentioning for tribal decks. The Golden Throne for 4 colorless, a legendary artifact with arcane life support. If you would lose the game, instead exile the Golden Throne and your life total becomes 1 and 1,000 souls die every day. Tap, sacrifice a creature, add 3 mana in any combination of colors. This is really sweet art and lore and flavor. It's really cool. I mean, if you don't know, this is the Emperor of the Imperium, which is being like maintained alive on the brink of death because he was mortally wounded millennia ago, and he's just kind of like hanging on. He's basically already a corpse that you can see in the art, so it's really sweet. The effect on the card itself is awesome too. It kind of stops you from dying once if they can't remove it. That's really sweet if you have any way to make this indestructible. And the other part is nothing to sneeze at either. It's adding 3 mana in any kind of tokens deck or aristocrats deck, which is where this is going to go. You can just kind of keep adding 3 mana every turn and you probably trigger all of your dies effects, so that's really nice too. Teysa Karlov will absolutely love this card. Next up is Exterminator. So 5 colorless, 1 white and 1 black, a sorcery. Non-land permanents your opponents control lose indestructible until end of turn and destroy all non-land permanents. So this is kind of nice for those kind of pesky decks that keep running Darksteel Forge and stuff like that. It also kind of lets you hedge against people that are playing any of the aforementioned kind of give everything indestructible cards. They're not going to be able to do that with this. That being said, 7 mana is a lot, but I think it might have a place in certain metas if your meta is running a lot of indestructible stuff. Next up is Celestine, the Living Saint. For 4 colorless and 1 white, a legendary creature, human warrior with flying, lifelink, and healing tears. At the beginning of your end step, return target creature card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the amount of life you gained this turn. So this is repeatable reanimation, which is always sweet. Just by itself, if she connects, that's 3 lives. So it's basically a Sun Titan impersonator, but it can be so much more than that in any kind of life gain deck, and that's not exactly difficult in white, so I see a ton of potential here. Imagine this in Aloro, for example. Woof, that's disgusting. Next up is Kaladus Assassin for 4 colors, 1 blue and 1 black. It's a creature human shapeshifter assassin for 3/3 with flash. It has polymorphine. You may have Kaladus Assassin enter the battlefield tapped as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it has, when this creature enters the battlefield, destroy up to 1 other target creature with the same name as this creature. Because it says up to, you can still use this to copy your creatures and not destroy them. Other than that, it's a clone effect with flash, which is already nice, but it can also just take out the thing you clone if it's an opponent's thing, so that's super nice. Imagine your opponent attacking into you when you have 6 mana open with an Elish Norn in play, and you play this and destroy their Elish Norn, and suddenly you have 1 on your side of the table. That feels absolutely disgusting, and there's going to be a lot of blowouts like that with this card. Next up is Birth of the Imperium. It's a saga for 2 colorless, 1 white, 1 blue, 1 black. Chapter 1 says, create a 2/2 white Astartes warrior creature token with vigilance for each opponent you have. Number 2 says each opponent sacrifices a creature, and Chapter 3 says draw 2 cards for each opponent who controls fewer creatures than you. I love how this mirrors all the colors really well. The first ability is white, the second is black, and the third is blue. This also seems pretty strong. You're playing this in a tokens deck, obviously, and you're getting 3 tokens with the first chapter, which is already great. Then For the next one, your opponents are going to sacrifice a creature each, and that means it's very likely that when the third chapter comes, you're going to have more creatures than your opponent, and you're drawing 2 cards for each opponent that you have more creatures than. That's a potential 6 cards in a 4-player game. Nothing to sneeze at. Even if you drew 2 off of this, it's already done more than enough. But if you manage to get 6 cards off of this, oof, that's going to be pretty close to game over. Next up is Nayam Shai Murad. For 2 colorless, 1 white and 1 black, it's a legendary creature, human rogue, 3/3 with Rogue Trader. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may have that player return target permanent card from their graveyard to their hand. If you do, that player chooses a permanent card in your graveyard, then you put it onto the battlefield under your control. So basically this is a nice political card for making alliances, but if you make it so you don't have that many things in your graveyard, you can get them to reanimate a super strong thing. That being said, there's a lot of hoops to jump through here. You need to deal combat damage, you need to have something big in your graveyard and nothing too small, and they need to have something in their graveyard, so that's a lot of restrictions on this. It won't be broken or anything, but it could be a fun deck to build around. Sister Hospitaller is for 4 colorless, 1 white and 1 black, creature human cleric, 3/2 with Medicus Ministorum. When it enters the battlefield, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, you gain life equal to its mana value. Whew, that is pretty solid, especially late game when you might need the life gain. You can reanimate something huge and get a bunch of life out of this. This feels a lot like Comic Guide, except 1 mana more, but you're gonna gain life, you're not gonna have to pay the echo cost, and this is also repeatable, so you could just keep blinking this and bringing more stuff back. This seems very, very good to me in a white-black deck. Next up is Triumph of Saint Catherine for 4 colors and 1 white, creature human warrior. It's a 5/5 with lifelink and Presidium Protectiva. When it dies, exile it in the top 6 cards of your library in a face-down pile. If you do, shuffle that pile and put it back on top of your library, and it has Miracle, 1 colorless and 1 white. Aside from the weird name that doesn't sound like a creature and sounds like an enchantment or something, this is really sweet. I really like this. It's just such a fun little sub-game of where is it ended up? Am I going to draw it next turn and be able to miracle it again? The body's nothing to sneeze at. A lifelink 5/5 is fine, and just the fact that you never know when it's going to come back and you're going to be able to miracle it when it does is really sweet. Next up is Grey Knight Paragon. 4 colorless and a white, creature Astartes Knight, a flash 4/4 with Rites of Banishment. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target attacking creature. If that creature is a demon, exile it instead. Okay, so this is really solid. I mean, it's a 4/4 body with flash out of nowhere that can ambush a bunch of stuff, but it also just takes out something that's attacking you, no questions asked. That seems really nice. And again, in a blink deck, you can flash this in, and even before you assign blocks, you can then blink it a couple of times with any sort of blink effect, and suddenly you're destroying 2 or 3 of their things. It's situational, but it's pretty powerful, and it could certainly find its way into certain decks. Space Marine Devastator is our first squad card for 3 colors and 1 white. It's a creature Astartes warrior with squad 2. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may pay 2 any number of times. When this creature enters the battlefield, create that many tokens that are copies of it. It's a 3/3 and it has Grav Cannon. When Space Marine Devastator enters the battlefield, destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. So squad is an interesting mechanic in that it's kind of like multi-kicker. It's basically just a multi-kicker that makes token copies of a creature. I like the mechanic. I think it's cool design space, and I really like tokens that are copies of permanence, as I've mentioned in other videos of mine. However, I feel that it's too easy a payoff for infinite mana strategies. It basically means that any kind of Basalt Monolith effect, once you can get the infinite mana going, is just going to be able to put a whole team with squad out. In this particular case, you can't win the game instantly because they're just 3/3s that enter the battlefield and destroy an enchantment or artifact. That's already pretty good. But, as you'll see with a couple of others that are coming up, you could just straight up win with them. So I think it's a bit of an issue, and it might make infinite combos more prevalent, which I don't really like. Next one is Ultramarines Honor God. For 3 colors and 1 white, it's a creature Astartes warrior with squad 2. And it's a 2/2, and it has other creatures you control get +1/+1. And here's one of the ones I was talking about. On its own, it's quite a fair and fun card. It can be really strong if you can sink like 10 mana into this and get like 4 copies. You do have to note that squad are not separate spells, so they can just counter the original spell and you won't get any of them. But the problem again is that if you have infinite mana, this is an instant win if you have any sort of creatures on the board, because suddenly you're going to give your creatures +infinite. Anything you have on the board gets +infinite, and then it just gets to attack and swing for the win. Obviously your opponents can have blockers and you might not have trample, but it just seems very easy to abuse this, and I think it's a pity because the mechanic is kind of fair and kind of fun if you're not going infinite, but as soon as you go infinite mana with it, then it just seems very easy to just win with this on the spot. Next up is Vexilus Preter for 3 colors and 1 white. It's a creature, Custodius, warrior. Doesn't have the Preter creature type. Interesting. And it's 3/4 with Flash, Vigilance, and Aegis of the Emperor. Commanders you control have protection from everything. Woo, that is pretty solid. So just a nice little Voltron protection piece. It has Flash, so it can surprise people out of nowhere, and it's a creature, which is nice in certain strategies. You want to have more creatures and less spells. This can really put a wrench in people's plans when they try to blasphemous act, or when they try to like target your commander with a removal spell and suddenly the spell is going to fizzle. Pretty awkward. Next up is Sister of Silence for 4 colors and 1 blue, a creature human knight, 3/3 with Flash, Psychic Abomination. When it enters the battlefield, counter target instant spell, sorcery spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. Again, this is really good in a Blink deck. It can protect your team very well against almost all removal. I'm kind of concerned about this card really because it just seems really annoying. You basically need creature-based wraths or creature-based removal to be able to deal with it, and even then, most of the time it's not going to work because you can just counter the triggered ability or the activated ability. Imagine having this in play with Deadeye Navigator. It's just going to make a really unfun kind of board state. I'm not sure how I feel about this one. Again, in Blink decks, it's just too easy to abuse these things. Don't know. Seems like a bit of a soft lock kind of card. Next up is Secarian Infiltrator for 2 colors and 1 blue, artifact creature, human soldier, 1/2 with Flash, squad 2, and Benediction of the Omniscia. When Secarian Infiltrator enters the battlefield, draw a card. So here's another one that's just a massive infinite engine. As soon as you have infinite mana, you just play this over and over and over. Thassa's Oracle, you just win the game. So I know there's a bunch of ways to do this already, to go infinite and win with Thassa's Oracle, but this is just another way. It just gives more consistency to all of those decks. Ugh. Don't love to see it. Next up is Primaris Eliminator for 4 colors and 1 black, a creature, Astartes warrior. When Primaris Eliminator enters the battlefield, choose 1, execution round, destroy target creature, or hyperfrag round, creatures target player controls get -2/-2 until end of turn. Another amazing card in Blink decks. This gives you either targeted removal for something big or a constant -2/-2 stream for smaller creatures that the opponent has. It kind of covers all its bases. It's a bit overcosted for both of the modes normally, but having that kind of flexibility means that you can just deal with tokens and go wide strategies or deal with go big strategies. This seems very good, and the fact that you can just blink it and blink it and blink it and do it again seems really broken. Next up is Assault Intercessor for 1 colors, 1 white, and 1 black. A creature, Astartes warrior, 3/2 with First Strike, Menace, and Chainsword. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life. So this is very good with any sort of Dictate of Erebos effects in Aristocrat decks. As usual, we have so many Aristocrat cards in these spoilers. Anything that's going to make the opponent sacrifice a creature when one of your creatures dies is going to drain them for 2. This is going to end games really quickly if it doesn't get answered. It's a slightly more complicated Zulaport Cutthroat effect because it's only for your opponents. It's also really good with board wipes because you wipe the board and suddenly they're just taking an absolute boatload of damage. So this is quite good, and I feel it's going to end games in a hurry. Sometimes you're just not going to have spot removal and there's going to be a big board and they're just going to play a board wipe and this is just going to kill you. Next up is Deny the Witch for 1 color, so 1 white, 1 blue, 1 black, instant, counter target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. Its controller loses life equal to the number of creatures you control. This is a really nice one for any deck that is trying to go wide with tokens, and in these colors, that's very specific, but there are quite a few of them. Just the added flexibility of hitting activated abilities and triggered abilities, I think means that this might well see play. It can deal a ton of damage after all. Next up is the Flesh is Weak for 2 colors, 1 white, 1 blue, 1 black, an enchantment. When the Flesh is Weak enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them are artifacts in addition to their other types, and non-artifact creatures get -1/-1. This is quite a weird one. So it's going to protect all your creatures from getting -1/-1, and most of the opponent's creatures, we can safely assume, are going to get -1/-1. So in that sense, it's like a permanent anthem for your team that also is a permanent -1/-1 for all opponent's creatures. That is pretty good, to be honest. It's going to mean that you're going to win most fights after you drop this, so I feel like this can see some play in go-wide strategies. Next up is Redempted Dreadnought for 5 colors, an artifact creature, Astartes Dreadnought. It's a 4/4 with Fallen Warrior. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may exile a creature card from your graveyard, Trample, and Plasma Incinerator. Whenever it attacks, if a card is exiled with it, it has +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the power of the exiled card. So I really like this with something like Death Shadow. Suddenly you're giving this +13/+13 and you're attacking with a 17/17. Obviously that's a very specific and narrow combo, but exiling anything that's like 5 power or more with this is going to feel pretty good, because you're going to be attacking with like a 9/9 trample at that point. That's pretty difficult to deal with. This is just a chunky big boy and I'm all here for it. Next up is Reaver Titan, another chunky big boy. For 7 colorless, it's an artifact vehicle 10/10 with void shields, protection from mana value 3 or less. That's nice. Not going to get chump blocked very often. And Gatling Blaster. Whenever Reaver Titan attacks, it deals 5 damage to each opponent, and it has crew 4. So this is going to end games in a hurry. You're attacking somebody for 10, and they're going to have trouble with blocking this. They're going to need to either burn a removal spell on it, or block with something meaningful, and probably more than one meaningful thing, because a 10/10 is pretty big. And then as soon as it attacks, you're dealing 15 damage if you've got 3 opponents. So that's actually really, really solid. I think this card is sweet. And then we have Thunderhawk Gunship for 6 colorless, an artifact vehicle, 6/6 with crew 2 and flying. When Thunderhawk Gunship enters the battlefield, create 2/2/2 white Astartes warrior creature tokens with vigilance, and whenever Thunderhawk Gunship attacks, attacking creatures you control gain flying until end of turn. So this is going to give you a whole team flying when it attacks. That's really nice, and a 6/6 flying by itself is no joke. What I like most about it though is the crew 2. It comes with 2 creatures that can crew it all by itself, so for 6 mana, that's actually really good. You're getting, what, 10/10 worth of stats here over 3 bodies, basically. So that's actually incredibly solid. And then when you add in the evasion, this just becomes really good in any sort of go-wide strategy, or in any kind of vehicle strategy too. I really think this card is awesome. And finally, we have Epistolary Librarian. For 2 colors, 1 white, 1 blue. It's a creature, Astartes Wizard, 3/4 with Veil of Time. Whenever it attacks, you may cast a spell with mana value X or less from your hand without paying its mana cost, where X is the number of attacking creatures. So this seems like it could do some broken stuff. If you manage to attack with enough creatures, you can drop something that gives them all indestructible, or gives them all double strike and lifelink, like True Conviction or something like that. I think it's fine, but the fact that it's an attack trigger is going to limit it somewhat. So I'm not sure how much play this is going to see outside of the precon. So there you have it. That has been all the Warhammer 40k cards that I think are going to see any modicum of play in Commander. Whew, it's been tough to review them all, but we finally got through it. What do you think with my assessment of these cards? Do you think I got any of them wrong? Please let me know in the comments section below. I read all your comments and respond to all of them. And if you enjoyed this video, please click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel because we are currently growing. And until next time, take care.